Well, I'm joined now by the Shadow Minister for Business, Innovation and Skills, Ian Murray, who will, at least I presume he will, be campaigning for the election of Ed Miliband up and down the UK. Let me ask you this, Ian Murray. If you go to one of these constituencies in England, the marginal constituencies where much of this election will be decided, and voters say to you, look, we quite like Ed Miliband's policies, we quite like this idea of a mansion tax, and we quite like the re-imposition of a 50p top rate of tax. But we want a bit of reassurance because we don't want Labour in a coalition with the SNP or in any way letting these Scottish nationalists into power because they want to break up our country. Can you give me some reassurances? Otherwise I might just vote for David Cameron. What are you going to tell them?
Well, there was a tremendous number of hypotheticals that you gave in your question there. I spend most of my time at the moment in Edinburgh, campaigning in my own seat and talking to my own constituents. But I will give you a story. I was in Croydon last week and I was chatting to the local Labour Party there, and what they were saying was exactly what you've just said. They want the 50p tax rate reintroduced, they want a mansion tax, they want an economy that's much fairer for people and works for working people all across the United Kingdom, and they want Ed Miliband in Downing Street. And the only way to get Ed Miliband in Downing Street and a Labour government is to vote Labour. You can't get a Labour government that risks a Tory government with the largest party for every single red seat that turns yellow in Scotland. They understand that, and everybody across the country understands that as well.
And if people in England say to you, fine, that's all good, I quite like the idea of a Labour government, I'm not sure I might vote for the Tories, but I want some reassurance that you won't do a deal with the SNP, what are you going to say to them?
Well, if a voter in England is saying I quite like a Labour government but I might want to vote for the Tories, then they don't want really a Labour government, do they? If you want a Labour government, you have to vote Labour.
Oh, so you don't want to convince people who are thinking of voting Tory but who might vote Labour?
We've seen this with the last time, with the Liberal Democrats going all over the country in the 2010 general election saying if you vote Liberal Democrat, we will stop a Tory government. Look what happened. The Liberal Democrats did a deal with the Tories.
So if I'm a voter in England and I say, look, I'm thinking of voting Labour, but I don't like these Scottish nationalists, they want to break up Britain. I want you to give me an assurance you won't do a deal with them, because I'm happy to vote Labour. I'm not voting less NP. Well, you're telling me you've got nothing to say to them? Well,
I'm saying that we don't want a deal, we are not needing a deal, and we're trying to fight for a majority Labour government.
Yes, and if I'm the voter in England, I'll say, well, that's not the same thing as ruling it out. Would you please rule it out so I can happily vote for you?
What most people actually say to me on the doorsteps is they don't like backroom grubby deals done by politicians. The voters decide who runs the country, and therefore we'll take that forward when that comes to pass. When I'm going all over the country as part of my portfolio and talking to people on the doorsteps, they tell me quite clearly that they want a Labour government, and therefore if they want a Labour government, there's only one thing that they do, and that's to vote Labour. If I'm one of these voters, I'd like a clear answer. Let's say I'm a no voter in Scotland or in Edinburgh where you've been doing much of your campaigning, and I say to you, look, we've been through this traumatic referendum. I quite like some of Ed Miliband's policies and I'm thinking of voting Labour, but I'm not going to vote Labour if you're going to let in the SNP by the back door. So will you give me an assurance you won't do a coalition deal with the SNP? What are you going to say to me? Actually, it's the other way around. If you vote SNP, you let the Tories in by the back door. Look, let's talk about what Ed and Jim said yesterday.
I voted no in the referendum. To me, it's more important that we preserve the United Kingdom than whether or not David Cameron or Ed Miliband runs the country. I'll happily vote Labour, but only if you can assure me you won't do a deal with the SNP. What are you going to say to me?
The issues are quite clear for this election. There was a very progressive programme put together by Jim Murphy in his wonderful conference speech yesterday. All of that is at risk if we let the Tories back in by the back door.
So you're not going to tell voters in marginal constituencies in England what your intentions are, and you're not going to tell no voters in Scotland what is the big secret?
Well, let me give you a categoric assurance and rule out a coalition with the Tories. There's your categoric assurance of coalitions in terms of this particular election. The quite clear thing is here, if people want
hang on a second. If you're so keen to rule out a coalition with the Tories, you can't then say you don't want to talk about hypotheticals about what will happen after the election. If you're so keen to rule out a coalition with the Tories, why won't you rule out a coalition with the SNP?
That's a completely ridiculous question, as you well know that it is. We're not planning a coalition, we don't want a coalition, and we're working for every single Labour vote in Scotland.
So will you rule out a coalition with the SNP?
The key message is that if you vote
so
SNP
will you
and you
rule
get
out a coalition with the SNP? You've just ruled out a coalition with the Conservatives. Why won't you say the same thing about the SNP?
Well, Gordon, it might be polite if you allowed me just to get to the end of the sentence. The key message is that every single seat in Scotland that goes from Labour to the Scottish National Party on the 7th of May risks another Tory government by the back door because they would be the largest party. That's the message of this election. That's what we're seeing on the doorsteps, and that's what we need to convince people that if they want a Labour government, they have to vote Labour at the election.
Let me not have to interrupt you and let you complete a sentence. You're saying we're happy right now to rule out a coalition with the Tories. When it comes to a coalition with the SNP, we are happy to... You finish the sentence.
Well, the SNP have ruled out a coalition with Labour. They've said that they wouldn't go into a formal coalition. We're in this position at the moment where we're saying very clearly we don't want a deal, we're not doing a deal because we're fighting for
hang on, you used the words rule out. You said, I will rule out a coalition or a deal with the Tories. Why won't you say, I will rule out a coalition or a deal with the SNP?
Because what we're clearly saying on the doorsteps to people is that if you want a Labour government, and most people say that to me, they want a Labour government, they want rid of this Tory government that wants to take public spending back to the 1930s before we even had an NHS. They want rid of the austerity politics. But what we're saying to them quite clearly on the doorstep, for every single seat that Labour doesn't get in Scotland that goes to the Scottish National Party, risks a Tory government. The clear message in this election is you vote for the party that you want to win, and if you want a Labour government, you have to vote Labour. Let's not risk 5 more years of David Cameron on the basis of Scottish Labour MPs being replaced by Scottish nationalists and risking that 5 more years of austerity for Scotland.
Which was a very long-winded way of refusing to answer the question.
Was that a question you just asked me there?
Yes, no, the question I asked you, and I've asked you several times, you haven't answered it, is you told me you were happy to rule out a coalition or a deal with the Tories. Why will you not rule out a coalition or a deal with the SNP?
I've quite clearly said 4 times, we're not planning for it, we don't want it.
You're not ruling it out. Say the word. Say, I will rule out a coalition.
We're looking forwards to a majority Labour government on the 8th of May. That's what we're fighting for, and that's what people want.
All you have to do is say the sentence, I will rule out a coalition or a deal with the SNP should Labour be the largest party.
Well, we won't be the largest party if the Conservatives party have more seats than us, and they'll have more seats than us if it's the case that Scottish Labour can't return the majority of MPs that we currently have. The mathematics are fairly clear. A simple calculation would show you, all the polls are showing you at the moment, it's a total dead heat according to the poll of polls that we've seen this week. So for every single red seat that turns yellow in Scotland, makes a blue government much more likely because they will be the largest party and they will take that forward. Every single election since the universal suffrage, the largest party has formed the government.
Given what you said in this interview, if I'm a yes voter and I'm thinking of voting Labour, I might not bother now, I'll just vote SNP, because you clearly won't rule out a deal with the SNP, which means you want to do a deal with the SNP, so I might as well vote for the Scottish Nationalists.
Gordon, it's quite clear that if the Tories are the largest party come the 8th of May, they will form the government of the United Kingdom. You cannot replace Scottish Labour MPs with Scottish National MPs and keep your fingers crossed that you get a Labour government. If people want rid of the Tories and they want a progressive agenda for social justice and change that Jim laid out yesterday, they have to vote Labour. Most yes voters that I speak to on the doorstep, and most yes voters tell me exactly what they want to see, and they tell me exactly the kind of Scotland they want to see. They don't want another Tory government. They want a Labour government. If you want a Labour government, you have to vote for it. You can't take the gamble of voting for someone else, keep your fingers crossed and hope that David Cameron is not walking into Downing Street on the 8th of May. That doesn't work. If you want Labour, you have to vote Labour.
Right, and what would you say to David Cameron when he says, look, this could be your worst nightmare? Not only will you get Ed Miliband, you'll get Ed Miliband, Nicola Sturgeon and Alex Salmond. And from what you've said in this interview, you won't rule that out.
Well, that would not be the case because the SNP have ruled that out. And what we're saying to everyone is don't let David Cameron become the Prime Minister. Let's go forward with a progressive beacon of change in this country. Let's take forward the ideas that Jim Murphy announced in the conference speech yesterday. He said he would make educational disadvantage a personal pledge and a personal promise and mission for him to deliver. He's putting more money into bursaries for the poorest kids at university. He's putting more money into people who want to go into training. If you want that, you have to vote Labour. It's clear and simple.
Right. Do you think Labour will hold on to all its Scottish seats in the general election?
We're fighting to hold on for every Scottish seat. Look, the polls are bad at the moment. There's no denying the polls are bad at the moment. We're 2 months away from a general election. The only person that's pleased about the polls in Scotland at the moment is, of course, David Cameron, because of the implications of what we've just talked about. We're fighting on the doors for every single vote. We're chatting to people and listening to what they've got to say. Jim, I think, did a wonderful speech yesterday of all the policies that people are talking about. More money for the NHS, more money into educational attainment for our most deprived communities. But it's interesting that you don't want to talk about policies, you want to talk about grubby backroom deals. Let's talk about the progressive policy we have so we can take forward a package to the Scottish people where they can decide whether or not they want to vote Labour.
If you'd answered a couple of simple questions, we could have talked endlessly about policies, but as it is, we're going to have to leave it there. Ian Murray, thank you very much indeed.